The granite floors of the great hall felt like ice beneath my knees. Even through the thick fabric of my uniform, I kept my head bowed, blonde hair falling forward to shield my face, as the evening celebration roared around me. Laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Glasses clinked in endless toasts, and the scent of roasted meat and honeyed wine saturated the air so heavily I could taste it on my tongue. But none of it was meant for me. I was invisible. That's what servants were supposed to be, especially silent ones. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for another fallen napkin near the high table, my movements careful and practiced. 7 years. 7 years since the fever had stolen my voice, leaving behind only this hollow silence where words used to live. 7 years of learning to communicate through gestures and careful expressions that most people never bothered to read. 7 years of being the girl they pitied at best, ignored at worst. "More wine here," someone shouted, and I rose smoothly, reaching for the crystal decanter on the serving table. The weight of it was familiar in my hands, grounding. At least here, in service, I had purpose. I had function. The pack was celebrating tonight, another successful treaty with the Northern Territories, another display of our Alpha King's dominance. Theron Ashford. Even his name carried weight, spoken in hushed reverence or barely concealed fear depending on who uttered it. I'd served in his household for 3 years now, always in the background, always beneath notice. That was safer. I moved between the tables, refilling goblets with practiced efficiency. My eyes caught briefly on the faces around me. Pack members flushed with drink and victory, their wolves close to the surface, eyes occasionally flashing with inner light. I'd grown up among them, but I'd never been truly one of them. How could I be? A wolf who couldn't howl, couldn't call out warnings, couldn't even speak her own name. Damaged goods, I'd heard whispered more than once. The memory of my mother's hands rose unbidden. Not the grandmother's jewelry that so many spoke of, but something simpler. Her fingers combing through my hair the night before the fever took hold. Her voice soft as summer rain. Strength isn't always loud, little one. Sometimes the strongest things are the quietest. Roots growing deep, stones weathering storms. I wondered if she'd known, if somehow she'd sensed what was coming and tried to prepare me. "You there, girl?" I turned toward the voice, finding Councilman Garrett gesturing impatiently. He was red-faced and sweating, his collar loosened and his eyes glassy with wine. I approached, keeping my expression neutral and attentive. "Fetch more of that excellent boar from the kitchen," he commanded, not looking at me. "And tell the cooks to make it quick. Our Alpha deserves the finest, and these scraps are growing cold." I nodded, already turning toward the service entrance, but his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The touch was too familiar, too rough. "What's wrong with you? Can't you speak? Answer me when I'm talking to you." My throat worked uselessly, panic fluttering in my chest like a trapped bird. I shook my head, gesturing toward my throat, mouthing the words I couldn't voice. His grip tightened, annoyance flashing across his features. "Useless," he muttered, shoving my arm away. They let anyone serve these days. Send someone with sense next time. The shame was familiar, settling over my shoulders like an old coat. I hurried toward the kitchen, my face burning, willing myself not to let the tears prickling behind my eyes fall. Not here. Not where they could see. The kitchen was chaos, fires roaring, cooks shouting, servers rushing back and forth with laden trays. I conveyed Garrett's message through gestures to the head cook, Marissa, who understood me better than most. She nodded, her weathered face softening with sympathy. "Don't mind that pompous fool," she said quietly, assembling a fresh platter. "His own son can barely string 3 words together when he's sober. Here, take this, and hold your head high. You're worth 10 of him." I managed a small smile, grateful even as the words felt hollow. Worth was measured differently in our world. Strength, dominance, the power of one's wolf. These were the currencies that mattered. What value did a voiceless servant hold? I carried the platter back into the great hall, the weight of it making my arms ache. The celebration had grown louder, more raucous. Someone had started a traditional pack song, voices rising in harmony that made my chest tight with longing. I'd loved to sing once, had been good at it even. Now I was just the silent maid. I was nearly back to Garrett's table when it happened. Someone stumbled, drunk and careless, crashing into me from the side. The platter tilted, and I watched in horror as the contents began to slide. I tried to compensate, shifting my weight, but it was too late. The serving dish tumbled forward, and I lurched after it, desperate to catch it before it crashed to the floor. Instead, I crashed into something far more solid. The room seemed to stop. Conversations died mid-word. The singing faltered and fell silent. I'd collided directly with the high table, with the Alpha King himself. Boar grease and sauce had splattered across the front of his formal jacket, dark stains spreading across the expensive fabric. My hands were pressed against his chest where I'd tried to catch myself, and I could feel the heat of him through the ruined clothing, could feel the steady, too calm beat of his heart. Slowly, terrified, I lifted my eyes. Theron Ashford looked down at me with an expression I couldn't read. He was younger than I'd realized from a distance, perhaps 30 at most, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of steel in winter. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that seemed carved from stone. Handsome in the way a blade was handsome, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "Don't move," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. Command, not request. The entire hall held its breath. I froze, my hands still pressed against his chest, my mind spiraling through every possible consequence. I'd ruined his clothing, embarrassed him in front of the entire pack. Servants had been banished for less. Some had faced worse than banishment. But he wasn't looking at the stains on his jacket. He was looking at me. His gaze traveled over my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle, studying me as though seeing me for the first time, as though I were something unexpected, something that didn't quite fit the pattern he'd anticipated. One hand lifted, slowly, carefully, as though approaching something skittish, and his fingers caught a strand of my blonde hair that had fallen forward, tucking it gently behind my ear. The gesture was so intimate, so impossibly tender, that my breath caught. "You're the one who doesn't speak," he said softly. Not a question, a statement. The silent maid. I managed a jerky nod, my heart hammering so hard I was certain he could feel it where my palms still rested against him. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like recognition, though we'd never properly met. His hand moved from my hair to my chin, tilting my face up so he could see me better in the flickering firelight. "What's your name?" he asked. I opened my mouth uselessly, then closed it, shame flooding through me. My hands moved to gesture, to spell it out in the simple sign language Marissa had taught me, but he caught my wrists gently. "No," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, something almost gentle. "Not like that. Show me." Confused, I glanced around until I spotted a small puddle of spilled wine on the table. With a trembling finger, I traced letters in the dark liquid. "Eliana, Eliana," he read, and the way he said my name, the first time I'd heard it spoken aloud in years, made something crack open inside my chest. "Eliana," he repeated, as though testing the shape of it, claiming it somehow. His eyes returned to mine, and in them I saw something that terrified me more than anger ever could. Interest. Real, focused, undeniable interest. "My lord." Garrett had appeared at his elbow, sputtering, face even redder than before. "This clumsy servant, I'll have her." "You'll do nothing," Theron said, his voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze blood. He didn't look away from me. "Return to your seat, councilman, now." The dismissal was absolute. I heard Garrett's sharp intake of breath, his retreating footsteps. But none of it seemed real. Nothing seemed real except the Alpha King's hand still gentle on my wrists, his eyes still locked with mine. "The celebration is over," Theron announced, finally releasing me and stepping back. His voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Everyone out. Now." There was a scramble of movement, chairs scraping, confused murmurs, the rustle of formal clothing as pack members hurried to obey. Within moments, the great hall was emptying, though I could feel the weight of curious stares, the whispered speculation that would follow. But the Alpha King's final words, spoken just before he turned away, were only for me. Report to my private study at dawn tomorrow, Eliana. We have much to discuss. And then he was gone, leaving me standing alone in the rapidly emptying hall, my hands still tingling where he'd touched them, my mind reeling with one impossible thought. What could the Alpha King possibly want with someone like me? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My small room in the servants' quarters felt suffocating, the narrow bed suddenly uncomfortable in ways it had never been before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Those steel-gray eyes studying me with an intensity that made my stomach flutter and my skin flush. I saw his hand reaching for my hair, felt the ghost of his fingers on my chin, heard my name in his voice like a prayer or a claim. What could he possibly want? The question circled endlessly through my mind as moonlight crawled across the worn floorboards. Punishment, surely. That made sense. He'd dismissed the room theatrically, but once alone, he would deliver whatever consequences I'd earned for my clumsiness. Banishment, most likely. I'd be sent away from the only home I'd known since losing my parents. Forced to find work in some distant territory where no one knew me, where I'd be even more alone than I already was. The thought made my chest ache with a loneliness so profound it took my breath away. But there had been something in his expression. Something that didn't look like anger. Something that looked almost hungry, curious, as though I were a puzzle he intended to solve. I rose before dawn, my body moving through the familiar morning routine on pure instinct. I washed in the basin of cold water, scrubbed my face until my cheeks were pink, and dressed in my cleanest uniform. My hands shook as I braided my blonde hair, pulling it back severely from my face. I wanted to look presentable, professional, forgettable, if possible, though I suspected it was too late for that. The castle was still silent as I made my way through the corridors, my soft footsteps barely echoing on the stone floors. Dawnlight filtered through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. I'd walked these halls hundreds of times, but never toward the Alpha King's private study. That wing of the castle was forbidden to servants except by explicit invitation. I'd never imagined I'd receive one. The study was located in the eastern tower, accessed by a spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever. My calves burned by the time I reached the heavy oak door at the top, my breath coming faster. I paused, pressing one hand against my racing heart, trying to calm myself. Then I knocked. 3 soft raps that sounded too loud in the morning quiet. Enter. His voice came from within, and I pushed open the door with trembling hands. The study was nothing like I'd expected. I'd imagined something cold and formal, all dark wood and official documents. Instead, I found a room that felt almost lived in. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, their spines worn from use. A large desk sat near the window, covered in papers and maps. But there were also comfortable chairs arranged near a fireplace, where embers still glowed. The scent of old leather and wood smoke filled the air, along with something else, something wild and clean, like pine forests and winter wind. Theron stood near the window, backlit by the rising sun. He'd changed from his ruined formal wear into simple dark pants and a loose white shirt, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked younger this way, less like the untouchable Alpha King and more like a man. A very dangerous man, I reminded myself. Close the door, he said without turning around. I obeyed, my heart hammering. The click of the latch felt final, like sealing myself into a cage with a predator. He was quiet for a long moment, just standing there, looking out at the grounds below. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, my hands clasped in front of me. Do you know why I asked you here, Eliana? The sound of my name and his voice still did strange things to my composure. I shook my head, then realized he couldn't see me. I shifted my weight, making the floorboards creak softly so he'd know I'd responded. He turned then, and the full force of his attention landed on me like a physical weight. In the morning light, I could see details I'd missed the night before. The faint scar along his jawline, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of his own sleepless night, the way his gaze seemed to see straight through every defense I'd ever built. Last night when you touched me, he said slowly, carefully, Did you feel anything unusual? I blinked, confused. Unusual? I'd felt terror, shame, the desperate urge to disappear, but I didn't think that's what he meant. I shook my head hesitantly. Something that might have been disappointment flickered across his features. He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood just a few feet away. This close, I could see flecks of darker gray in his eyes, like storm clouds gathering. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice dropping lower. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to reveal cannot leave this room. Do you understand? I nodded, my pulse racing. He drew in a long breath, as though steeling himself. For the past 5 years, I haven't been able to feel my wolf. Not completely. It's still there. I can shift. I can access its strength when needed, but the connection is muted, distant, as though there's a wall between us. His jaw clenched, and I saw real pain flash across his face. Do you understand what that means for an alpha? To be cut off from the very thing that makes you who you are? My heart clenched with unexpected sympathy. I knew exactly what that meant. I knew what it was like to lose the fundamental part of yourself that connected you to your pack, your people, your identity. My hand moved unconsciously to my throat, and his eyes tracked the gesture. Yes, he said softly. I thought you might understand. He took another step closer, close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Last night, when you touched me, when your hands were pressed against my chest, for the first time in 5 years, I felt my wolf clearly, fully. The wall disappeared like it had never existed. I stared at him, not understanding. That couldn't be right. I was nobody. Nothing special. How could my touch possibly affect the Alpha King's connection to his wolf? I know what you're thinking, he continued, his eyes never leaving mine, that it's impossible, that there must be some mistake. But there is no mistake, Eliana. I've consulted with healers, with wise women, with every expert in our territory and beyond. Nothing has worked. Until you. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted, and took my hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, much larger than mine. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm, and I gasped. Actually gasped, the sound small and startled in the quiet room. His eyes closed, and his entire body seemed to relax, tension draining from his shoulders. There, he whispered, almost reverently. Do you feel it? And I did. I felt something, a presence, vast and powerful, brushing against the edges of my consciousness. Not threatening, but curious, ancient and wild and patient. His wolf, I realized with shock. I was somehow sensing his wolf, but that should be impossible. I wasn't a healer. I wasn't anything. He opened his eyes, and the gratitude in them was so raw it hurt to see. I don't understand it either, he admitted. But you're the first person in 5 years who's made me feel whole again. The first person who's broken through whatever curse or affliction has been plaguing me. A curse. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Someone had cursed the Alpha King, someone powerful enough to damage his connection to his wolf, without killing him outright. That spoke of enemies, of dangers lurking in shadows, of political machinations I couldn't begin to comprehend. And somehow, I'd stumbled into the middle of it. He released my hand, and I felt the loss of that connection like a physical ache. He stepped back, running his fingers through his dark hair in a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. I know this is overwhelming, he said. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I need your help, Eliana. I need to understand why you affect me this way. And I need... He paused, something complicated crossing his features. I need you close, where we can figure this out together. Close. The word sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. I'm assigning you to my personal service, he continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone, as though he were making an official pronouncement. You'll attend me directly, in meetings when possible, during meals, throughout the day. I'll tell the council it's because I require a servant who knows how to be discreet, who won't spread gossip or speak out of turn. His mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. Your silence will be your greatest asset in that story. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very thing that had made me invisible, that had reduced me to nothing in the eyes of most pack members, was now the excuse that would bring me into the inner circle of power, that would keep me close to the Alpha King himself. I should have been terrified, and part of me was, a large part. But another part, a part I didn't want to examine too closely, felt something else entirely: hope. There will be consequences to this, he warned, his expression growing serious again. People will talk. They'll speculate about why I've chosen you, what favors you might be providing. The other servants may resent you. The council members certainly will. You'll become visible in ways you've spent years avoiding. Are you prepared for that? Was I? I didn't know. But I knew what the alternative was: returning to my small room, to my invisible existence, to the slow suffocation of a life lived in silence and shadow. At least this offered something different. Something more. Even if it was dangerous. I nodded, meeting his eyes directly for the first time, trying to show him that I understood, that I accepted, that I was stronger than I looked. His expression softened, and he reached out again, this time brushing his fingers along my cheek in a gesture so tender it made my breath catch. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know I'm asking a great deal, but I promise you, Eliana, I will keep you safe. No matter what comes, no matter who opposes this, you will be protected. You have my word." The weight of an alpha's promise settled over me like a cloak. In our world, such vows were sacred, binding. He'd just tied himself to my safety in a way that went beyond duty or necessity. Why would he do that for someone like me? Before I could process that question, he stepped back, his demeanor shifting back to something more businesslike. "Your duties will begin today. I have a council meeting this morning. You'll attend and serve refreshments. This afternoon, I meet with the patrol captains. Tonight, dinner in my private quarters. We'll use these moments to test the theory, to see if proximity maintains the connection." I nodded, my mind already spinning with everything this meant, everything that was about to change. "One more thing," he added, his voice dropping lower. "The reason for my affliction, the curse if that's what it is, someone doesn't want me at full strength. Someone wants me weakened, vulnerable. By helping me, you may be making yourself a target. Are you certain you want to take that risk?" I thought about my mother's words, about quiet strength and weathering storms. I thought about spending the rest of my life invisible and voiceless, fading into nothing. And I thought about the way his wolf had felt against my consciousness, ancient and powerful and somehow lonely, like recognizing like. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and nodded firmly. His answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then let's begin." The council chamber felt like walking into a den of wolves, which, I supposed, it literally was. 6 council members sat around the massive circular table, each one representing a different faction of our territory. I recognized them all from years of serving in the Great Hall, though none had ever looked at me directly before. Now, as I entered behind Theron, carrying a tray of refreshments, every single pair of eyes locked onto me with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and hostility. Garrett was there, his face still flushed, though whether from last night's wine or current indignation I couldn't tell. Beside him sat Councilwoman Vera, sharp-featured and sharper-minded, her dark hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a severe bun. The others I knew by reputation. Silas, the war captain with scars mapping his arms. Helena, the territory's chief healer. Warren, who controlled trade routes. And old Benedict, who'd served 3 generations of Ashford Alphas. "Gentlemen, ladies," Theron said smoothly, taking his seat at the head of the table. His voice carried absolute authority, no trace of the gentleness he'd shown me in his study. "Let's begin." I moved quietly along the perimeter of the room, setting out cups and filling them with spiced tea, the motions automatic from years of practice. But I was acutely aware that this time was different. This time, they were watching. This time I mattered somehow, even if none of them understood why. "Before we address territorial matters," Vera said, her voice crisp and cutting, "perhaps our Alpha might explain this unusual choice in personal attendant. Theron didn't even glance my way. His posture relaxed, almost bored. I require discretion, councilwoman. Someone who physically cannot spread gossip or reveal confidential information seems an obvious choice. There are other servants who could fulfill that role, Garrett interjected, his tone accusatory. More experienced ones, more appropriate ones. Are you questioning my judgment, councilman? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Theron's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Because if you feel qualified to make decisions about my household staff, perhaps you'd also like to make decisions about military strategy, diplomatic relations, which territories we should align with. Garrett paled, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No, my lord. Then I suggest we move on to matters that actually concern this council. Theron's dismissal was absolute. But Vera wasn't deterred so easily. She studied me with calculating eyes as I poured her tea, and when she spoke again, her tone was measured, strategic. Forgive my colleague's bluntness, but you must understand our concern, Alpha Theron. You've been isolated lately, distant. Some might say distracted. Now you surround yourself with silence personified. She gestured toward me. It creates an appearance of withdrawal from your people. I saw Theron's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She'd struck closer to the truth than she knew. His isolation wasn't by choice, but by necessity, a response to the wall between him and his wolf. How could an alpha lead effectively when he couldn't fully connect with the very essence of what made him alpha? My connection to our people has never been stronger, he said evenly, as evidenced by last night's successful treaty. Or have you forgotten we've secured northern trading rights for the next decade? No one questions your political acumen, Silas rumbled, his scarred hands flat on the table. But there are other concerns. The southern border has seen increased activity, unidentified wolves crossing our territory lines. Helena's healers report unusual illnesses in the outer villages. And there are rumors. What kind of rumors? Theron's voice had gone very quiet. Silas exchanged glances with the others before continuing. That you've been compromised somehow. That your strength has waned. Some of the younger pack members have been testing boundaries, challenging patrol captains. Nothing overt yet, but the whispers are growing louder. I felt Theron's tension from across the room. Saw the way his fingers pressed against the dark wood of the table. This was what he'd feared, that his affliction would become known, would be seen as weakness, would invite challenges to his authority. In wolf hierarchy, perceived weakness could be fatal. Perhaps, Benedict suggested gently, his ancient voice carrying the weight of experience. A demonstration of strength would quiet such rumors. A hunt, perhaps, or a challenge match with the patrol captains. I'll consider it, Theron said, but I could hear the strain in his voice. How could he demonstrate full strength when he was cut off from his wolf? Any such display would only confirm the rumors if he failed to perform as expected, unless... I found myself moving closer to where he sat, not consciously deciding to do it, but responding to some instinct I didn't fully understand. I set down the tea pitcher on the table near his hand, letting my fingers brush against his arm for just a moment. Brief, barely noticeable, but deliberate. His sharp intake of breath was so quiet I doubt anyone else heard it. But I felt the change in him immediately, saw his posture shift, his shoulders straighten. When he looked up at the council again, something fierce and powerful blazed in his eyes that hadn't been there moments before. A hunt, he said, his voice suddenly resonating with alpha authority that made everyone in the room sit straighter. Excellent suggestion, Benedict. 3 days from now, we'll gather the pack for a traditional run through the northern woods. Let anyone who doubts witness for themselves. Vera's eyes had narrowed, her gaze flickering between Theron and me. She'd seen something. I was sure of it. But what? A servant touching her alpha? It should mean nothing. Yet the calculating expression on her face suggested she was filing the information away, adding it to some mental ledger of suspicious coincidences. The meeting continued for another hour, covering trade agreements, border patrols, and preparations for the upcoming winter season. I stayed close to Theron, refilling cups, clearing away empty dishes, always finding small reasons to pass near him. Each time, I saw that shift in his demeanor, confidence returning, strength solidifying, and each time, I caught Vera watching. When the council finally adjourned, the members filed out with various expressions. Garrett looked sullen, Silas thoughtful, Benedict satisfied. But Vera paused at the doorway, turning back to look directly at me for the first time. "What's your name, girl?" she asked. I froze, my hands full of empty cups. Theron had risen from his seat, but Vera's attention was fixed solely on me. "She cannot speak, councilwoman," Theron said coolly. "Surely you know this." "Oh, I know," Vera replied, her tone almost pleasant. "But everyone has a name, don't they? Even the silent ones." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a specimen under glass. "There's something familiar about you, about your face. I can't quite place it." My heart hammered. My mother had been unremarkable, a lower-ranked pack member. My father had died when I was young. I barely remembered him. There was nothing notable about my bloodline, nothing that should register with someone like Vera. "The servants all blur together after a while," Theron said dismissively, moving to position himself partially between us. The gesture was subtle, but protective. "Was there something else you needed, councilwoman?" Vera's smile was sharp as a knife. "No, Alpha. Thank you for a illuminating meeting." She swept out, leaving a chill in her wake. The moment the door closed, Theron turned to me, his expression intense. "Are you all right?" I nodded, though my hands were shaking slightly as I set down the cups. Vera's scrutiny had felt like being dissected, like she could see through skin and bone to whatever secrets lay beneath. "She's dangerous," Theron said quietly, moving closer. "Brilliant mind, but she plays games within games. If she's suspicious of you," he trailed off, worry creasing his brow. I reached out and touched his hand, a bolder gesture than I'd have dared even that morning. But something had shifted between us in his study, some understanding that went beyond words. He needed me, and I was beginning to realize that perhaps I needed him too, in ways that had nothing to do with his affliction. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady. "This afternoon," he said, "I meet with the patrol captains. It will be more of the same, suspicion, testing, challenges both subtle and direct. But if you're there, if you can help me maintain the connection." He squeezed my hand gently. "Will you?" I nodded without hesitation. His smile was grateful, but there was something else in his eyes now. Something warmer, more personal. "You're braver than you think, Eliana. Most people would run from this situation, from the danger, the scrutiny, the impossible position I've put you in. But you're still here. Where else would I go?" I wanted to ask. But more than that, I wanted to say, "I'm here because you see me, because for the first time in 7 years, I'm not invisible." The patrol captain meeting proved even more challenging than the council session. There were 12 captains, all hardened warriors who commanded the various border patrols and guard units. They were less politically subtle than the council members, more direct in their assessments and challenges. "The Alpha seems distracted lately," one captain, a broad-shouldered man named Derek, said bluntly. "Missed the last 2 training sessions with the elite guard. When was the last time you ran with your own patrols, my lord?" "Careful, Derek," another captain warned, a woman named Sasha with silver-white hair and predator's eyes. "You're approaching dangerous territory." "I'm approaching truth," Derek countered. "An Alpha leads from the front, not from behind closed doors. The pack needs to see strength, not absence." I was pouring water at the side table, but I could feel the tension crackling through the room like lightning before a storm. This was a direct challenge, the kind that could escalate into physical confrontation, if not handled carefully. Theron sat very still in his chair, and I could see the war playing across his features, the desire to respond with force, to put this upstart captain in his place, tempered by the knowledge that without his full connection to his wolf, such a confrontation could go badly. I made a decision. Moving with the pitcher, I approached Theron's side of the table, leaning in as though to refill his glass. My hair fell forward, momentarily shielding us from view, and I let my hand rest against his shoulder, a touch that would look accidental to anyone watching, but was anything but. The change was instantaneous. Theron's eyes flashed with golden light, his wolf surging forward with a power that made every captain in the room instinctively bare their necks in submission. Even Derek paled, his earlier bravado evaporating. "You want to see strength?" Theron's voice was layered now, human and wolf speaking in unison, a sound that made my bones vibrate with primal recognition. "Challenge me, Derek. Here. Now. Let's see if your words match your courage." Derek's submission was complete, his head bowed, his throat exposed. "Forgive me, Alpha. I spoke out of turn." "You spoke out of concern," Theron corrected, his voice returning to normal, though the power still hummed beneath his skin where I touched him. "And that concern isn't misplaced. You're right. I have been absent, distracted. But that changes now. The hunt in 3 days will be only the beginning. I'll be rejoining training sessions, running with patrols, showing the pack that their Alpha is exactly where he needs to be." The captains relaxed incrementally, mollified by the promise. Sasha's eyes were thoughtful as she watched the exchange, and when her gaze briefly touched me, I saw understanding dawn there. She'd put pieces together that she maybe shouldn't have, but she said nothing. The rest of the meeting passed without incident. Plans made for increased border surveillance and training rotations. I stayed close to Theron throughout, our connection maintained through casual touches that looked like nothing more than a servant doing her duty. When the captains finally left, Theron slumped back in his chair. Exhaustion etched across his features. "That was close," he murmured. "Too close. Without you..." He didn't finish the sentence. I understood. Without me, he would have been exposed, challenged, possibly overthrown. "Sasha knows something," he continued, rubbing his temples. "She's too observant for her own good. But she's also loyal. I don't think she'll speak of her suspicions." I hoped he was right. That evening, I made my way to Theron's private quarters for dinner. My stomach knotted with nerves for entirely different reasons than the day's earlier challenges. Private quarters. Just the two of us. The implications sent heat rising to my cheeks. But when I arrived, I found the setting surprisingly normal. A small table by the window, 2 chairs, simple food laid out on plain dishes, no formality, no pretense. Just a meal shared between 2 people who'd spent the day navigating dangerous political waters together. Theron gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit, please. You must be exhausted." I hesitated. Servants didn't sit with their Alpha. It violated every protocol, every hierarchy that structured our world, Eliana. His voice was gentle but firm. "After today, after everything you've done, you're not serving me right now. You're..." He paused, searching for words. "You're my partner in this. Sit." So I sat, feeling strange and exposed and oddly honored all at once. He poured wine for both of us, then settled into his own chair with a sigh. "Tell me about yourself," he said, then caught himself with a wry smile. "Or rather, let me guess, and you can nod or shake your head. We'll develop our own language." And somehow, impossibly, we did. Through gestures and expressions, through yes and no questions and creative pantomiming, I told him about my childhood, about losing my voice to fever, about my mother's death 3 years ago. He told me about the weight of leadership, about the isolation of being Alpha, about the curse's gradual onset 5 years ago, slow enough that at first he'd thought it was stress or exhaustion, only realizing the true extent of his disconnection when it became impossible to ignore. "The worst part," he admitted quietly, wineglass cradled in his hands, "wasn't the loss of power. It was the loneliness, being cut off from the one companion who'd been with me since my first shift. My wolf isn't just a part of me, it's my oldest friend." And suddenly there was just silence. I reached across the table and took his hand, and his fingers tightened around mine like I was an anchor in a storm. "Thank you," he whispered. "For understanding, for not running, for being here." Outside the window the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and sitting there with Theron's hand in mine. For the first time since losing my voice, I didn't feel quite so alone, but in the shadows beyond the candlelight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That somewhere, Someone who'd cursed the Alpha King was now wondering who this silent maid was, who'd managed to break through their carefully constructed prison, and what they might do to stop her. The next 2 days passed in a blur of constant proximity and mounting tension. I became Theron's shadow, present in every meeting, every meal, every moment he needed to project strength and authority. We developed a rhythm. I would find reasons to stay close, to brush past him, to hand him documents or pour his drinks, each touch brief but essential. And each time, I felt his wolf surge forward, powerful and whole, allowing him to lead with the confidence his people needed to see. But the scrutiny was intensifying. Servants whispered when I passed in the corridors. I caught fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when I appeared. Speculation about what favors I might be providing, what hold I might have over the Alpha King. Some of the younger maids looked at me with envy, others with contempt. Marissa, the head cook who'd always been kind, pulled me aside on the second day. "Be careful," she signed, her weathered hands forming the words we'd practiced years ago. "The higher you climb, the harder you fall. And there are people who would be very happy to push you." I nodded, grateful for her concern. But I couldn't explain the truth, couldn't tell her that I wasn't climbing toward anything. I was holding someone up, preventing a fall that would destroy far more than just me. That afternoon, while Theron met with trade representatives, I was summoned to the servants' hall. My stomach dropped when I saw who waited there. Garrett, accompanied by 2 household guards. "The silent maid," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "So difficult to locate when one cannot simply call out, 'Come with me, please.' There are questions about inventory discrepancies in the Alpha's quarters." It was a transparent excuse, and we both knew it. But refusing would only make things worse. I followed him through the castle, my mind racing. The guards weren't necessary for inventory questions. This was something else. He led me to a small, windowless storage room in the castle's lower levels, far from the main corridors, far from anyone who might hear or help. The moment the door closed behind us, his false courtesy evaporated. "What game are you playing?" he demanded, stepping closer. I backed up until I hit the wall, my heart hammering. "A girl like you doesn't simply stumble into the Alpha's favor. What are you doing to him? What spell or trick are you using?" I shook my head frantically, trying to sidestep around him, but he blocked my path. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm, the same too rough grip from the night of the celebration. "You think you're special now? Protected?" His breath stank of wine and anger. "You're nothing. A voiceless defect who got lucky, and when the Alpha tires of whatever amusement you provide, you'll be right back where you belong, invisible and worthless." The words hit like physical blows, each one finding the fears I'd harbored since this began. He was right, wasn't he? I was nothing special, just a broken girl who happened to have some unexplainable effect on Theron's curse. Once the curse was broken, if it could be broken, I would be discarded, forgotten, returned to the shadows where I belonged. "Maybe I should remind you of your place," Garrett continued, his grip tightening painfully, "before you get ideas above your station." Fear spiked through me, sharp and cold, but beneath it, something else stirred. Something that had been growing since that first moment in Theron's study. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind, but cold and steady as winter frost. I was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed, tired of people like Garrett treating me as less than human because I couldn't speak. I might not have a voice, but I had other weapons. I met his eyes directly, refusing to look away, refusing to cower. Then I raised my hand and pointed deliberately at the door, a clear, unmistakable dismissal. His face flushed dark red. "You dare!" The door slammed open. Theron filled the doorway, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with barely contained rage. His eyes had gone full wolf gold, his presence so overwhelming that Garrett stumbled backward, releasing my arm like it had burned him. "What?" Theron said, his voice dangerously soft. "Are you doing with my attendant, Councilman? There were questions about..." Garrett's words tumbled over each other, panic replacing arrogance. In a locked storage room, with guards posted outside, Theron moved into the space with predatory grace. "Try again." Garrett's submission was immediate and complete. His head bowed, his entire body language screaming apology. Forgive me, Alpha. I overstepped. I was concerned about her influence on you. Her influence? Theron's laugh was cold. You were concerned. How thoughtful. He moved to stand beside me, and I felt the heat of his anger rolling off him in waves. Let me clarify something for everyone in this castle who might share your concerns. Eliana serves at my direct command. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any threat against her is a threat against the Alpha. Do you understand? Yes, my lord. I don't think you do. Theron's hand found mine, and he raised it slightly, displaying it to Garrett. This woman has my protection, my favor. Anyone who touches her without permission will answer to me personally. Spread that message to the others who've been whispering in corners. I won't be this merciful a second time. Garrett fled the moment he was dismissed, practically tripping over himself in his haste. The guards had already disappeared. When the door closed again, Theron turned to me, his expression transforming from fury to concern in a heartbeat. Did he hurt you? His hands were gentle as they examined my arm where Garrett had grabbed me, anger flashing anew when he saw the reddening marks. I shook my head, even though my arm throbbed and my heart was still racing. Eliana. He cupped my face, forcing me to meet his eyes. You have to tell me if anyone threatens you. I can't protect you if I don't know. I gestured helplessly. How could I tell him when I couldn't speak? I wasn't always with him. I couldn't summon him every time someone looked at me wrong or whispered insults. Understanding dawned in his expression. Right, he muttered. We need a better system. He thought for a moment, then pulled a small silver pendant from beneath his shirt, a wolf's head etched in detail. This is my personal sigil. Every pack member recognizes it. He unclasped the chain and fastened it around my neck. Wear this. If anyone gives you trouble, show them this. If there's real danger, send someone to find me with this, and I'll come immediately. The pendant rested heavy and warm against my collarbone, still carrying his body heat. It felt like more than protection. It felt like a claim. The hunt is tomorrow, he continued, his hands still gentle on my shoulders. I need you there at the starting point. Not for the run itself, but... He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. I need to shift in front of the entire pack, to prove my strength. And I don't know if I can do it without you nearby. The admission cost him. I could see it in the tension of his jaw, the shadows in his eyes. Asking for help went against every alpha instinct, every lesson in self-reliance he'd been taught from birth. I reached up and touched his cheek, a gesture of comfort and promise. I would be there. I wouldn't let him face this alone. His hand covered mine, holding it against his face, and for a moment we just stood there in that dim storage room, two damaged people finding unexpected strength in each other. I don't understand what you're doing to me, he whispered. The curse, yes. You break through it somehow. But it's more than that, isn't it? I think about you when you're not near. I look for you in rooms full of people. He stopped himself, something like fear crossing his features. This is dangerous. Not just politically. This feeling. I knew what he meant. I felt it too. The pull that went beyond explanation. Beyond the mysterious connection between my touch and his wolf. Something deeper was growing. Something that had nothing to do with curses or duty or need. Something that felt terrifyingly like falling. Before either of us could acknowledge what hung unspoken between us, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Theron stepped back, smoothing his expression into alpha indifference, just as one of his personal guards appeared. My lord, the guard said, bowing. Councilwoman Vera requests an urgent audience. Theron's jaw tightened. Of course she does. Tell her I'll receive her in my study in 10 minutes. After the guard departed, Theron turned back to me. Stay close during this meeting. Vera suspects something. I saw it during the council session. She'll be probing. Testing. But she's too smart to make direct accusations without proof. We made our way to his study, and I took up my usual position near the serving table, while Theron settled behind his desk, every inch the commanding alpha. When Vera entered, her sharp eyes immediately found me, studying the pendant now visible at my throat. Something flickered in her expression. Satisfaction, as though a theory had just been confirmed. Alpha Theron, she began, settling into the chair across from him, without waiting for invitation. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." "What can I do for you, councilwoman? I've been doing research," she said pleasantly. "Into your lineage. Fascinating reading, really. Did you know that 5 generations ago, an Ashford alpha was cursed by a spurned mate? She severed his connection to his wolf, left him powerless. He died within a year. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet." Theron's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hands tense on the desk. "Ancient history," he said evenly. "What relevance does it have to current matters?" "Perhaps none," Vera agreed, her tone still pleasant. "But I also researched curses more generally. Fascinating subject. Apparently, most curses that sever supernatural connections can only be broken by very specific means, blood magic usually, or true mate bonds." Her eyes flicked to me again. "Very rare occurrences, true mate bonds. The odds of finding one are astronomical." She knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to be dangerous. "Is there a point to this history lesson, councilwoman?" Theron's voice had gone cold, only to say that I'm here to help, my lord. Vera leaned forward, her expression earnest now. "If you're facing a curse, if someone has attacked you in this way, the council needs to know. We need to find who's responsible, to protect you properly. And if I'm not facing any such thing, then I'll apologize for my presumption and never speak of it again." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But if I'm right, time matters, Alpha Theron. Curses like this don't remain static. They grow stronger, more invasive. Eventually, they become permanent, unbreakable." The threat was clear beneath the helpful words. "Tell me what's happening, or watch your condition worsen beyond repair." Theron was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, he sighed. "If, hypothetically, a curse of that nature existed, what would you suggest?" Vera's smile widened, genuine this time. "First, we identify the source. Second, we protect the cure." Her gaze moved to me again, and this time there was no hostility in it, only calculation. "Third, we prepare for the inevitable confrontation when the person who laid the curse realizes their work is being undone. And how would one prepare for such a confrontation? By making sure the cure is never left vulnerable, never alone, never exposed to danger without protection." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "Hypothetically speaking, of course. I'll leave you to consider these theoretical scenarios, but Alpha Theron, the hunt tomorrow, it will draw every pack member's attention. If I were planning to eliminate a threat, that's when I would strike. When everyone is distracted. When guards are spread thin." She left as smoothly as she'd arrived, leaving behind implications that hung in the air like smoke. Theron was on his feet the moment the door closed, pacing like a caged animal. She knows. She's too clever not to have pieced it together. But is she ally or enemy? Is this genuine help or manipulation? I didn't have an answer. Vera was an enigma, brilliant, powerful, loyal to the pack, but with her own agenda that I couldn't begin to guess. "Tomorrow," Theron said, stopping his pacing to look at me directly. "The hunt. If Vera's right, if someone plans to strike." He crossed to me in 3 long strides, taking my hands in his. "I can't lose you, Eliana. I won't. You've become—" He struggled with the words, and I saw vulnerability in his eyes that the Alpha King should never show. "Essential. Not just because of the curse, because of who you are." My breath caught. This was the acknowledgement we'd been dancing around, the feeling that had been building beneath every touch, every shared glance, every moment of understanding. "After the hunt," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "after I've proven my strength to the pack, I'm going to announce you as my personal attendant officially, give you status, protection that can't be questioned. I know it will cause talk, but—" I pressed my fingers to his lips, stopping the words. He'd already given me his sigil, his protection, his trust. I didn't need titles or official positions. I just needed to know that this feeling between us was real, that I wasn't imagining the connection that went deeper than curses or magic. His eyes darkened, and slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his forehead to mine. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he whispered. "Whatever comes after, we face it together. Yes? I nodded, my hands coming up to rest against his chest where I could feel his heart beating strong and steady. Together, he repeated, and it sounded like a vow. Outside the window, the sun was setting on the eve of the hunt. Tomorrow would test everything: Theron's strength, my courage, the fragile alliance we'd built, and somewhere in the shadows, someone who'd cursed an Alpha King was watching, planning, waiting for their chance to strike. But for now, in this moment, we had each other, and somehow, that felt like enough. Dawn broke cold and clear over the northern woods, the sky painted in shades of pearl and rose gold. The entire pack had gathered in the meadow at the forest's edge, hundreds of wolves in human form, their excitement crackling through the air like electricity. This was tradition, ritual, a reaffirmation of pack bonds and hierarchy through the shared joy of the hunt. I stood near the tree line, wrapped in a thick cloak against the autumn chill, Theron's pendant heavy and visible at my throat. Around me, pack members were stripping off their clothing in preparation for the shift, laughing and calling to one another, their wolves eager and restless beneath their skin. Theron stood at the center of it all, addressing his people. He'd removed his shirt despite the cold, revealing the muscled planes of his chest and back, the Alpha's traditional preparation for the shift. He looked magnificent, powerful, and commanding, every inch the leader they needed him to be. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his jaw. This was the moment of truth. A full shift in front of hundreds of witnesses. If he couldn't access his wolf completely, if the connection faltered, every rumor would be confirmed. His authority would shatter like glass. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw the question there, the need. I nodded once, my hand going to the pendant at my throat, a silent promise. I'm here. I won't let you fall. Today we run as one, Theron called out, his voice carrying across the meadow. We hunt as our ancestors hunted. We celebrate the bonds that make us pack, that make us family. Let the wild claim us! The response was a chorus of howls, human throats making wolf sounds, anticipation and joy and hunger all mixed together. And then the shifting began. I'd seen wolves shift hundreds of times, but it never stopped being beautiful in a primal, otherworldly way. Bodies blurred and reformed, skin becoming fur, human cries becoming animal howls. Within moments, the meadow was filled with wolves of every size and color, grays and blacks and browns and reds, all waiting, all watching their alpha. Theron stood alone now in human form, and I felt the weight of all those eyes, all that expectation. He closed his eyes, his body tensing as he reached for his wolf. Nothing happened. Seconds ticked by, too many seconds. Murmurs began rippling through the pack, confusion and concern. I saw Derek in wolf form, his large gray body shifting restlessly. Saw Sasha's white wolf move closer, protective instinct warring with worry. Panic flashed across Theron's face, quickly suppressed but visible to anyone watching closely. The curse had strengthened, just as Vera had warned. The connection was slipping even further from his grasp. I didn't think. I just moved. Dropping my cloak, I ran across the meadow, my feet flying over the frost-touched grass. Pack members scattered in surprise as I sprinted toward their alpha, but I didn't care about protocol or propriety or the scandal this would cause. I only cared about reaching him before the situation became irreversible. Eliana? Theron's eyes flew open as I reached him, surprise and alarm warring in his expression. I grabbed his hand, lacing my fingers through his, and pressed our joined hands against his bare chest over his heart. The connection blazed to life between us. Not subtle this time, not gentle, but fierce and brilliant as lightning. I felt his wolf surge forward with almost violent intensity, felt the ancient power that had been locked away suddenly set free. Theron gasped, his eyes flashing gold, and then he was shifting. The transformation was explosive, powerful, more dominant than any shift I'd ever witnessed. Where a man had stood, now crouched the largest wolf I'd ever seen, black as midnight with those same steel-gray eyes, radiating alpha authority that made every wolf in the meadow submit instinctively. The pack erupted in howls of approval and relief. Their alpha was strong, Their alpha was whole, but I was still standing there in the center of it all, human and vulnerable among hundreds of wolves, my hand outstretched toward where Theron had been. Every eye was on me now, every wolf suddenly aware that something unprecedented had just occurred. The silent maid had touched their alpha, and somehow, impossibly, it had made him stronger. Theron's massive wolf form moved toward me, and for a heartbeat I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But then he pressed his great head against my palm, a gesture of such trust and affection that my throat went tight. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw gratitude, wonder, and something that looked dangerously like love. "Go," I mouthed, even though he couldn't hear me. "Hunt, show them." He held my gaze a moment longer, then threw back his head and howled, a sound so powerful, so commanding, that it resonated in my bones. The pack answered, hundreds of voices joining in harmony, and then they were running, flooding into the forest in a river of fur and fang and joy. I stood alone in the suddenly empty meadow, my heart pounding, wondering what I'd just done. I'd exposed our secret in front of the entire pack. I'd shown everyone that their alpha needed me, that without my touch he couldn't shift. I'd made myself a target for anyone who wanted to weaken him. That was quite a display. I spun to find Vera standing at the edge of the tree line, wrapped in a dark cloak, her expression unreadable. She must have stayed behind deliberately, waiting to speak with me. I tensed, my hand going to Theron's pendant, ready to defend myself if necessary. But Vera made no threatening moves. She simply studied me with those calculating eyes. "Do you know what you are?" she asked quietly, moving closer. A true mate bond is one thing, rare, powerful, but documented. But what you have with him is something else, something older. She paused, choosing her words carefully. My grandmother was a keeper of old knowledge. She told me stories about the ancient packs, about certain wolves who were born without the ability to shift, but who carried a different gift: healers, anchors, bridges between the human and wolf worlds. My eyes widened. I'd never heard such stories. "The fever that took your voice," Vera continued. "Are you certain that's all it was? Or did it awaken something that had been dormant? Dormant and waiting for the one person who would need what you could offer?" I shook my head, overwhelmed. I was nobody. Nothing special. Just a servant who'd lost her voice to illness. "Or," Vera said softly, "you're exactly what you appear to be on the surface. And this is simply fate working in mysterious ways. Either explanation, you're the key to breaking the curse on our alpha, which means you're also the greatest threat to whoever laid that curse in the first place." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small vial filled with dark liquid. "Wolfsbane extract, purified and concentrated. If someone attacks you, throw this in their face. It won't kill them, but it will incapacitate them long enough for help to arrive." She pressed it into my hand. "Stay alert today. The pack will return exhausted and distracted. If I were planning an attack, it would be then." "Why are you helping me?" I wanted to ask, but of course I couldn't. Vera seemed to understand the unspoken question. "Because despite my political maneuvering and my reputation for playing games, I'm loyal to this pack. And right now, you're the best chance we have of keeping our alpha strong and alive." She smiled thinly. "Also, I like you. You've got spine. Most people would have run screaming from this situation. But you stood in front of hundreds of wolves and claimed your place at his side without saying a single word. That takes courage." She left before I could respond, melting back into the trees, leaving me alone with the vial in my hand and 1,000 questions in my mind. The pack returned as the sun reached its zenith, wolves flooding back into the meadow in groups, exhausted and satisfied. The hunt had been successful. I could smell blood on the air, could see the contentment in the way they moved. Theron's massive black wolf was at the head of the pack, commanding and powerful, and when he shifted back to human form, there was no hesitation, no difficulty. The transformation was smooth and complete. Pack members crowded around him, congratulating him, their faith renewed, but his eyes searched the meadow until they found me, and the relief in his expression was palpable. I started toward him, but a hand on my arm stopped me. I turned to find Sasha, now in human form and wrapped in a robe, her silver hair wild around her face. "Come with me," she said urgently, her voice low. Now, something's wrong. I hesitated, looking toward Theron, but Sasha's grip tightened. Please. It's about the curse. I found something during the hunt, something you both need to see, but not here. Not in front of everyone. Every instinct screamed warning, but Sasha was one of Theron's most trusted captains. If she'd found information about the curse, I let her lead me away from the meadow, into the forest's edge. We walked for several minutes, moving deeper into the trees until the sounds of the celebration faded behind us. The silence of the woods pressed in, broken only by our footsteps and the occasional bird call. Sasha, I tried to gesture, to ask where we were going, but she didn't slow. Just a bit further, she said, but something in her voice had changed, gone flat. Understanding hit me like ice water. This wasn't Sasha, or rather, it was her body, her voice, but something else was controlling it. Someone else. I tried to pull away, to run, but her grip was iron strong, and she was a trained warrior. She spun me around, slamming me against a tree hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. Finally, a voice said, not Sasha's voice, but something older, feminine, layered with magic. The little anchor, the one who's been undoing all my careful work. Sasha's eyes had gone milky white, unseeing. She was being used as a puppet, her body controlled by whoever had cursed Theron. I fumbled for the wolfsbane vial, but the possessed Sasha knocked it from my hand, sending it rolling into the underbrush. Her hand closed around my throat. Not squeezing yet, but the threat was clear. 5 years, the voice continued, speaking through Sasha's mouth. 5 years of watching him weaken, watching his authority crumble, knowing that soon he would fall and my grandson could take his rightful place as alpha. And then you appeared. A voiceless nobody who somehow broke through magic that should have been unbreakable. Her grandson. The pieces clicked into place. Someone in the pack wanted Theron's position. Someone whose grandmother was powerful enough to curse an alpha king. Who? I mouthed, desperate to understand, to give Theron this information if I survived. You'll never speak his name, the voice hissed. You'll never speak anything again. Once you're gone, the curse will solidify. The alpha will fall, and my family will rise to take what should have always been ours. The hand on my throat began to tighten, cutting off my air. I clawed at Sasha's arm, but she was so much stronger. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. This couldn't be how it ended. I couldn't die here. Couldn't leave Theron to face this alone. A massive black wolf exploded from the trees, hitting Sasha's possessed body with the force of a battering ram. They rolled away from me, and I collapsed against the tree, gasping for air. Theron's wolf stood between me and Sasha, every line of his body radiating lethal intent. But he couldn't attack. This was Sasha, one of his own, innocent and controlled against her will. Killing her would destroy him. Clever alpha, the voice purred from Sasha's mouth as she rose to her feet, completely unharmed despite the impact. But what will you do? Kill your loyal captain to save your little pet? Or let me finish what I started and watch your curse become permanent? Theron's wolf growled, a sound that promised violence. But he didn't attack. Couldn't attack. I saw the standoff, saw the impossible choice, and made my decision. Pushing myself up from the tree, I ran, not away from Sasha, but toward her. I slammed into her possessed body, wrapping my arms around her in what looked like an embrace, but was actually a prison. If the witch controlling her wanted to hurt me, she'd have to do it at close range. And maybe, just maybe, if I could touch Sasha the way I touched Theron, I could help her fight the possession. Foolish girl, the voice snarled. But I felt Sasha's body jerk, felt resistance stirring within her. The captain was strong-willed, a fighter. She was in there, struggling against the control. I pressed my forehead to hers, focusing on that strange ability I didn't understand, that connection that broke through magical barriers. Help her, I thought desperately. Give her strength. Sasha's body convulsed, and suddenly her eyes cleared from milky white to their normal predator gold. Get off me, she gasped, her voice her own again, full of horror and fury. She's Still, here. A presence slammed into me, not physical but magical, ancient and furious. The witch was trying to possess me instead, to take control of the one person who threatened her plans. I felt her consciousness pressing against mine, trying to force me aside, to claim my body as she'd claimed Sasha's. But where Sasha had been overwhelmed, I found something else waiting. That silence inside me, that void where my voice used to be. It wasn't empty. It was a shield, a barrier that magic couldn't penetrate, because there was nothing to grab onto, no foothold to exploit. The witch's presence recoiled, shrieking soundlessly in frustration. And then she was gone, ripped away by the force of my fundamental difference. Sasha and I collapsed together, both shaking. Theron shifted immediately, pulling off his cloak and wrapping it around us both, his hands checking us for injuries. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're all right." "Sasha, I'm fine," Sasha gasped, her voice raw. "She used me. That bitch used me. I felt everything but couldn't control anything." Tears streaked her face. "I'm so sorry, I couldn't fight her, I tried." "It's not your fault," Theron said firmly, helping us both to our feet. "Did you see anything? Know who's controlling the magic?" "A woman," Sasha managed. "Old, powerful. She kept thinking about Warren, Councilman Warren. Said something about her grandson taking what's rightfully his." Warren, the council member who controlled trade routes, who'd been quiet and unremarkable in every meeting, who had the most to gain from Theron's fall if his family could claim the alpha position. "We need to get back," Theron said urgently. "Now. If they're ready to make direct attacks, they might try for a larger strike while the pack is distracted." We ran back toward the meadow, but even before we broke through the trees, I could smell smoke. Thick, acrid, wrong. The celebration had turned to chaos. Flames engulfed several of the supply tents, and pack members were running in every direction, trying to organize a response. But this was no accident. I could see figures moving through the confusion, strangers in dark clothing, attacking anyone who got too close. "Mercenaries!" Theron snarled. "They're using the fire as cover. Sasha, organize the captains. Defensive positions. Protect the young and injured first." Sasha nodded and disappeared into the crowd, already shouting orders. Theron turned to me, conflict written across his face. "I need you safe. But I also need—" "Go," I mouthed, pushing him toward the chaos. "I'll stay back. I'll be safe." It was a lie, and we both knew it. But he was alpha. His pack needed him. He kissed me then, hard and desperate and too brief, before shifting and plunging into the battle. I watched his black wolf tear into the mercenaries with brutal efficiency, watched him rally his pack, turn confusion into coordinated defense. And I saw Warren at the edge of the clearing, watching it all with calculating eyes. When his gaze found me, he smiled, cold and triumphant, before disappearing into the forest. He thought he'd won, thought that even if this attack failed, he'd exposed enough chaos, enough weakness, to begin his ascent to power. He was wrong. I ran toward the castle, my mind racing. If Warren was here orchestrating the attack, his grandmother, the witch, would be somewhere close, probably in the castle itself, using the distraction to finish the curse, to make it permanent before Theron could recover. I had to find her, had to stop her. The castle was nearly empty, most of the staff and guards at the celebration. My footsteps echoed through the halls as I ran toward the Alpha's quarters, the logical place for a witch to work curse magic. The pendant bounced against my chest, a reminder of the man who'd trusted me, who'd given me purpose and protection, and something that felt terrifyingly like love. I wouldn't let him down. The door to Theron's study was ajar, and I could hear chanting from within, low guttural words in a language I didn't recognize. I pushed through to find an old woman standing in the center of the room, hands raised, dark energy swirling around her in visible waves. She'd carved symbols into the floor, was burning herbs that filled the air with sickly sweet smoke. She was finishing the curse, making it permanent. Her eyes snapped to me, widening in surprise, then narrowing in fury. "You, the broken girl who won't break. No matter. You're too late. The curse solidifies at sunset. And there's nothing you can— I didn't let her finish. I lunged forward, diving through the dark energy that felt like ice against my skin, and grabbed her hands. The moment our skin connected, I felt it. The curse itself. A living thing woven through Theron's very essence, designed to sever him from his wolf permanently. But I also felt something else. My own strange gift. That ability to forge connections, to break through barriers. I'd used it to reach Theron's wolf. I'd used it to help Sasha fight possession. Now I turned it on the curse itself, following its threads back to their source. This woman, this witch, her hatred and ambition fueling the dark magic. And I began to unravel it. She screamed, trying to pull away, but I held fast. The curse fought me, burning through my veins like poison, trying to redirect onto me instead. But that silence inside me, that void where my voice had been, swallowed the darkness like a black hole swallows light. The witch's power couldn't touch what wasn't there. The curse shattered. I felt it break like glass, felt the fragments of dark magic dissipate into nothing. The witch collapsed, suddenly ancient and frail without her power sustaining her, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," she whispered. "You're nothing, nobody." How? I didn't have an answer. I didn't understand it myself. I only knew that it was done. Footsteps thundered in the hallway, and then the room was full of people. Theron in human form, breathing hard, streaked with soot and blood, but alive and whole. Vera close behind, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Guards pouring through, surrounding the witch. Theron's eyes found me, and I saw the moment he felt it, the curse truly, completely gone. His wolf surged forward, powerful and present in a way it hadn't been in 5 years, the connection restored fully without needing my touch to maintain it. "Eliana," he breathed. And then he was across the room, pulling me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "What did you do? How did you—" I couldn't explain, could only hold him back, feeling his heartbeat strong against mine, feeling his wolf celebrating inside him. Free at last. Warren and his grandmother planned it all, Vera was saying, directing guards. A bid for power that's cost them everything. They'll face pack justice. They'll face execution, Theron said quietly, his voice hard as stone. "No one attacks my pack, threatens my mate, and lives to tell of it. Mate." The word hung in the air, unmistakable and irrevocable. He pulled back just enough to cut my face, his eyes searching mine. "Is that all right?" he asked softly, vulnerable despite his alpha authority. "Can you accept that? Accept me? Accept this life? Accept everything that comes with being—" I kissed him, cutting off the anxious words, pouring everything I couldn't say into the press of my lips against his. Yes, yes to all of it. Yes to him. When we finally broke apart, the room had tactfully emptied except for Vera, who wore a satisfied smile. "Well," she said dryly, "that's one way to announce a mating bond. Though I'd suggest a more formal ceremony at some point. The pack will want to celebrate." Theron laughed. Actually laughed, the sound rich and free and full of joy. "They'll celebrate whether we want them to or not. But first we clean up this mess. Rebuild. Heal." He looked down at me, his expression softening. "Then we figure out this new life together. Together. Like he'd promised in his study, like we'd vowed without words 100 times over." The next weeks were a whirlwind of changes. Warren and his grandmother faced pack justice. Banishment for him, execution for her, both stripped of rank and name. The pack celebrated their alpha's restored power with a feast that lasted 3 days. And through it all, I stood at Theron's side, no longer invisible, no longer silent in the ways that mattered. The formal mating ceremony was held on the first snow. The entire pack gathered to witness their alpha claim his mate. I wore a simple white dress, my blonde hair loose and flowing, Theron's pendant still at my throat, and when he took my hand before our people, when he marked me as his in the traditional ways, I felt the pack's acceptance settle over me like a blessing. I would never have my voice back. But I'd found something better, a place where I belonged, a purpose that went beyond service, and a man who saw me not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd found in the silence. Standing in the snow with Theron's arms around me, his wolf content and whole inside him, our pack celebrating around us, I finally understood what my mother had meant about quiet strength. Sometimes the strongest things didn't need to roar. Sometimes they only needed to endure, to anchor, to love without reservation. I was the silent maid of the Alpha King, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.